So once again, we have another game that I wanted to talk about a year prior to actually talking about it now, because I played it during the Steam Next Fest. In this case, it was the Steam Next Fest of winter 2024, so like January, February-ish. However, at the time, I didn't quite have the software that I wanted to use down pat, if I remember correctly. So a lot of the footage that I recorded tended to be pretty choppy and messy, and then I just kind of just said, you know what, no, I'll pick it up later if I really want to review this thing. And so here we are today, reviewing this thing. But before I talk about Ereban Shadow Legacy, let me just say real quick, Happy New Year. I really wanted to say it in the last video, but the last video was supposed to come out in December. That's why it was only just a title card that you saw on top of like the opening or wherever I decided to put it. I just wanted to put Happy New Year in there since it went up on New Year's. Anyway, Happy New Year. Let's get on with the review. Visually speaking, Ereban isn't all that striking to look at, but it's good enough for what it has going for it. Mainly the art style and stuff like that, which in my opinion, I would much rather have a game with a strong sense of style than a game that's just boasting, hey, look how realistic we can be. Ereban, again, falls into the former, even if the environments could use a bit more love in the visually distinct department. Because the characters, or at least the main characters, look perfectly fine, especially the main character. I make that distinction because only Ayana, the protagonist, Set, Mira, and well, that's basically it, have unique models. The robots you'll come across in the game are distinct in how they look, so you know what kind of enemy they are at a distance, and they serve that purpose well. Speaking of character designs, Ayana's character design, when she gets her actual Ereban attire, is one of my favorites that I'd seen in a while. I just love how cool and busy it is. It's so busy, in fact, that other characters look simple in comparison. This can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. It can be a good thing to emphasize that she's a fish out of water, but it can also be a bad thing because it makes other characters look plain by comparison. Beyond that, while I'm talking about the visuals, the animations in the game are pretty janky a lot of the time. If you're crouch walking up an incline, for example, Ayana's legs will crab walk over her torso. It's kind of funny to look at. Kind of makes you think that if seeing her fade into shadows wasn't scary enough for you, then seeing her menacingly crab walk up a hill will do the trick. All that said, the visuals overall are pretty decent. Now, as for the narrative for Ereban Shadow Legacy, I have to say that it's pretty straightforward and personally not what I got into the game for. I just wanted an excuse to play a game that gave me Origami vibes. I know there's a sequel, but I heard some mixed things about it, so I put it off for now. That said, is the story good? It's alright. It ends pretty abruptly, but doesn't do anything particularly offensive, at least not in my mind. It's your standard affair of big corporation, in this case Helios, is doing something shady and you, Ayana, are trying to get to the bottom of it. Next thing you know, you find yourself loosely recruited by a ragtag group of terrorists, if you're listening to the Helios propaganda at least, called the Forgotten Sons. And from there, the game kicks into gear. Now, when I say the Forgotten Sons, I should really just say Mira and Set. The game's cast is very small, totaling to roughly 5 characters. Now, that's not a slight or a criticism, by the way. That's just me pointing out that this short game has a small cast. If anything, that's for the best. Speaking of the cast, your mileage will vary with Ayana or some of the in-game dialogue in general. It's not bad, at least not in my opinion, but there are some lighthearted jokes that Ayana will make in the beginning that kind of paint a rough picture of her. And no, I don't mean she's making really edgy jokes that make her look like a terrible person. No, quite the opposite, actually. This is as if you're going to get another character that does nothing but quip or point out how something she did was silly. And no, she's not on the level of Frey from Forspoken. I've only seen clips of her quips, but no, Ayana's nowhere near that. In fact, I'll tell you now without spoiling that side of Ayana does not last long, but it is there, so I thought I'd point it out for the more humor-averse people. And no, I'm not talking about the people that are like, I'm very picky with my humor, I'm very picky with my jokes, everyone has a Marvelism today. No, I'm talking about the people who are just straight up like, if there's any jokes at all, I hate this. Now you know, she does a bit of joking in the beginning. You're welcome. Besides all of that, the game also has a morality system which can dictate your ending. The rules for how you get the 3 to 4 endings is pretty straightforward though, once you get going. Even the game will go out of its way to make it obvious what is a good decision and what is a bad one. So all in all, Without spoiling, did I enjoy the story for Ereban Shadow Legacy? Yes. Do I think it could have been done better? Also yes, but like I said earlier, I didn't come into this game for the narrative. That's what I meant when I said that in the beginning. It could have had no story and I would have been satisfied just with the gameplay. Speaking of gameplay, we're going to talk about the gameplay now. Ereban is a stealth action adventure game with some linear to open and open to linear levels, if that makes sense. There are 8 chapters in total, and you can beat the game in less than 6 hours, even if you're doing everything that you can casually. Personally, I like the open levels the most, since they tend to give you multiple approaches to take down enemies and get to your objective. But I can see how people would prefer the more linear and focused parts of each level. So, at the end of the day, it comes down to preference. What also comes down to preference is how you approach using Ayana's shadow abilities. There are some basic ways to go about using your shadow abilities, but beyond that, you can unlock new abilities to use so long as you have shadow orbs to use on them. Shadow orbs are essentially skill points that you can find in each level. You can also find small tech thingamajigs to upgrade your small arsenal of gadgets. It's pretty crazy how many tools the game gives you to get through each level, when for half of the game I relied on the old tried and true method of waiting in the shadows, stabbing an enemy in the back, then scurrying away. If someone saw the body, that's half of my work done because they just go check and I pounce on them. By the way, there is an ability that you can unlock that will hide bodies with the shadows. I can't quite remember though off the top of my head whether or not that is tied to the morality system or not though. Now, I was playing on hard difficulty, so there was definitely some risk in doing the things I was doing. I know that the easy and normal difficulties are obviously much more forgiving, but I wanted to play hard mode for the extra challenge. And it wasn't all that challenging until the halfway point, a little past halfway point, if I'm being honest. By that point, getting one shot by enemies when you are caught and getting sent back to a checkpoint became very annoying. But that's hardly the game's fault and more of my fault because I'm impatient. Oh, I should probably mention that. Yes, when you are caught by an enemy, generally, that's a one shot. There are abilities you can do to help mitigate that, but generally speaking, when you're caught, they zap you, you're gone. Now, before I continue, I will say this. I didn't care too much about what score I got at the end of each level. After you complete a level, the game will score you based on your performance. I'm not one who normally cares about that after maybe the first couple hours. I'll try really hard at the beginning, but after that, I just stop caring. If you're the kind of person who wants to like 100%, I did excellent every single time, no fails, no discoveries, no faults, then hard mode might actually be very difficult. I don't know though, because I, again, am impatient. So I'll settle for a B if I'm on like chapter 6 because I don't care anymore. I just want to stab things in the back. That's probably why, it wasn't as challenging for me. But if you're the kind of person who does want that difficulty and restriction that the ranking system, if I can call it that, would give you, then yeah, it might be challenging. It just wasn't for me. Now, what I do want to talk about real quick is how janky the platforming can be. Jumping from one spot to another isn't difficult, but having to incorporate shadow movement made it more challenging than it had to be. Not because of skill issues, but rather because if the camera changed perspective while I was platforming or crawling on a wall, then I'd get turned around, burn the rest of my stamina, because the game is based on stamina. If you're using your shadows, they don't want you to be, using that for too long infinitely, because then platforming is trivialized. Then at best, I'd have to climb back up to where I was, or at worst, I get caught by an enemy or fall to my death and get insta-killed either way. For anyone that has tried to play old school survival horror games and could not get with the fixed cameras suddenly changing angles and then making you run into a wall or run backwards into an enemy, it's that same thing. It was fairly annoying to deal with during my playthrough. Beyond that though, I don't have many other things to say aside from a bug or two that stood out to me. The first bug was one that I get where I die when someone is spouting dialogue, then I'd restart from checkpoint, then the dialogue wouldn't repeat itself. The second kind I would get were just general collision issues while I'm shadow crawling on walls and end up going deeper than I intended. Ultimately though, I think that Ereban Shadow Legacy is a decent game and worth checking out, but I do want to point out that the game is $25 for a roughly 6-hour experience. If you are the type to replay stealth games often to get better scores and the like, this is a steal. If you are not the type to replay stealth games to get better scores or replay on harder difficulties, then maybe wait for a sale on this one if $25 for a 6-hour experience is like, to you. It really depends on whether you expect a longer game out of $25 or not, and what kind of game that is. In my case, I got the game on sale and had a good time with it. And personally, $25 for a roughly 6-hour experience, that's not too bad for me. At least not with this kind of game. Like, honestly, I would have more negative things to say about it if this game went for, say, the dollar equivalent and said, we're $25 for 25 hours. Too much. That is way too much. I'd say even like doubling it to 12 would be too much. So I think 6 is a good sweet spot. Whether or not, again, it is for $25, that's up to you. Now, in the script, I wrote that Ereban Shadow Legacy gets a go for it from me if you intend to get it on sale. What I should be saying there is, it's a caution if you want to get it on sale. If everything here just seems like, I don't know. But officially, for me, I'm just giving it a go for it straight up. As you can see, I always struggle with price points below $30 and how I should recommend content that cheap, because normally below $30, people tend to say, I don't care if it's janky, I don't care if it's this, I don't care if it's that. It's under $30. It's practically free. You know, that's how some people tend to be, so it's really hard for me to kind of quantify quality and what you should expect around there. It really comes down. I'm just the guy that reviews the thing, tells you about what's in it, and says, hey, I really liked it or I really didn't like it. It's up to you at the end of the day. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy New Year. Later.